Welcome to Area DMG.
Welcome back to Area DMG. I'm your host, Philip Wesley, the Mile High Mouth, and today we're going to talk about the first 15-minute principle of movies. Or rather, we're going to talk about the first 15 minutes of the beloved film, The Little Mermaid from Disney. This was technically considered the beginning of Disney's, I guess you could say, Renaissance, which went on from Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Mulan to some extent. Let's see, there were some pretty good films that came out around that time. They had some missteps. I mean, Pocahontas was terrible. Pocahontas ruined a lot of things for people. And then there were also a bunch of misfires with Atlantis, Hunchback of Notre Dame. Even though I think The Hunchback of Notre Dame is one of these kind of weird masterpieces of Disney animation, it wasn't exactly a huge success. They've had some rough times. I mean, I think at the time that Little Mermaid came out, you still had a little bit of the bite from Don Bluth leaving, and you still had was it Glenn Campbell was like the big person they had there that was kind of bringing it up a bit. You see a lot of his art style in The Little Mermaid, and it's pretty great actually. But let's get into the first 15 minutes of The Little Mermaid and why it's a perfect example of this concept. I mean, the whole concept is that when you're considering your film or when you're making your film, the first 15 minutes of your film will determine whether or not people continue to watch your film. So those need to be shot in a way that expresses everything about your movie, what you're trying to say, and just like everything about it is in those first 15 minutes. It's also your establishing shot is your first impression, the first thing that you show your audience. And it's kind of interesting that with The Little Mermaid, and if you have the movie on DVD or Blu-ray, feel free to go ahead and rewatch it with us. And you'll see what I mean with the first 15 minutes. I mean, heck, you don't even see the main character until about 5 minutes in, and you don't get all of her motivations, or rather her little motivational song, until the exact 15-minute movie mark, right? It's funny because they build up to that, and then they invest you in it. And so let's talk about it. Like the first shot of your movie is what your movie's about. And some people know that. For example, Sofia Coppola knows that. And for some bizarre reason, the first establishing shot in Lost in Translation is Scarlett Johansson's butt. Think about that for a moment. Wait a second, what is she trying to say with this film? We'll break that down at some point. We'll break down the first 15 of Lost in Translation. We'll break down the first 15 of Chungking Express. We'll break down the first 15 of so many different movies. It's going to be kind of a long series, and it'll help me pad my count. It'll help me give you content. Ooh. But we're not going to go away from video game related content. We are also going to do anime movies and video game related movies because there's quite a few, and we'll see what we go with that. Anyways, the first shot in this movie is of gray clouds, which is actually pretty significant because the whole movie is about a gray concept. It's about the change and cycle, about compromise. The movie doesn't even start underwater because it's not a movie about an ocean or even Ariel the Little Mermaid. It's about change, which is why the first water you see in the movie is clouds above the ocean. The first wildlife you see are seagulls, which Scuttle in here is kind of an impartial observer, sort of. He is a little bit biased toward Ariel, but they're just kind of there. These animals are more or less just there. They're not part of the food chain, essentially, and they're not part of... They're just kind of like, I guess you could say, observers. And in some cases, in the case of this opening sequence, they're moving the camera down, which then swoops you down to some dolphins, and then finally, a boat. The first mermaid you see in the movie is actually a wooden... it's a wooden masthead on a boat. And we're introduced to Prince Eric, who's given a name early on in the movie, and the concept of Merpeople. King Triton must be in a friendly type mood. And every bit of music right around that point is actually a nod toward Ariel's later musical numbers, which is also some really nice confluence between. There's a good fluidity to that. Well, so we're introduced to Eric and the whole Merpeople thing, and then we're not actually introduced. Well, okay, I'm gonna get to this in a little bit. I think it's kind of funny because like there's little musical cues of part of your world from the beginning of the film, but that doesn't show up until exactly at the 15-minute mark. But we are introduced to it through kind of like I guess you could say, really good camera transitions. We're starting from the clouds. We're like an omniscient narrator or observer. We're starting from the clouds. Then we're given the view from the seagulls down to the dolphins, then up to the boat. When you're on the boat, it transfers from character to character as they're going, and then finally to a fish that accidentally gets thrown overboard during a little sequence where one of the sailors is like kind of yelling at Grimly and loses hold of the fish. And then after we're shown this fish fall into the water, it's kind of funny because the fish's nature and the way it's animated is different in the air when it's near death. As soon as it ends up landing into the water, the camera falls down to it, and then suddenly the fish becomes way more animated, breathing an exasperated sigh of relief. And then we are introduced, as the fish goes through, to more and more ocean life, just kind of setting the world. And then finally we're introduced to merpeople, or rather a merman and then a mermaid of all different shapes and sizes. And then we're introduced to the world of Atlantica, King Triton and Sebastian, and every single one of Ariel's sisters. And they're building up to introducing her, the namesake of the movie. And right when they're about to do that, she's nowhere to be seen. And this, of course, angers her dad. And after he yells out her name, because they don't actually, after he yells out her name, she pops up from behind a mast. We're introduced to her and Flounder at a shipwreck. We're introduced to the basic concept of danger in the ocean. Like we've shown that, oh look, the ocean is beautiful. Look at all this great stuff. But we're also introduced to the concept of danger with it. Through the shark chase that's in there, we're given kind of the intricacies of her personality. We see her collecting things, and we're not really shown why she's doing this. For all we know, she could be scavenging these for minerals to bring back to Atlantica. She could be there because her dad wants her to be, or because who knows what's she going to do with these things. We're not shown that yet. And then we're introduced to Scuttle, who explains very badly the things that she brings him. And at that point, we're introduced to kind of the concept that she's got this drive to know more about some of the things she finds here in the ocean. That maybe she's been collecting these or so. That she's interested and curious in those. We're learning along with her, and we're learning kind of a distorted view of the world above that she gets from Scuttle. Then that reminds her of the music concert. You find out that she feels guilt about that because, oh my goodness, she's like, oh, my dad's going to kill me, blah, 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 blah. We've already got this bit of conflict that's been set up between Ariel and her dad. And then as soon as she starts running away from that, we're introduced to Flotsam, Jetsam, and Ursula. We're introduced to the main villains of this show, of this movie, pretty early on, within the first 15. And we're given Ursula's motivation, which is essentially she was banished from the palace, and she's mad about that. We're not really given many of the details of why, but we are just given that she's got a bit of a grudge. And then she sends Flotsam and Jetsam, her eels, which also act as her eyes, and our narrator eyes at points, to follow Ariel. And then we're introduced to King Triton's feelings on humans. He comes off as just being a bit overbearing, maybe some type of prejudice there. There's some deep damage there, which they don't actually go into in this movie. And we're also introduced to kind of after he yells at Ariel, we're given right immediately afterwards a sequence where he regrets his outburst, which shows that Well, you kind of get this concept that he's a single father trying to do the right thing. He just doesn't know that because he's out of his experience. And then Sebastian pipes up, and Sebastian, being the blowhard, kind of flamboyant character of this, ends up getting sent to go spy on her. And then we're brought into the grotto, and we don't really get a good look at the grotto until right at the first 15, when the first couple notes of Part of Your World start showing up. And if you're watching through the first 15 of this movie, you've been brought through a huge ride. There's a lot of information that's been given to you. Been introduced to almost all the major characters, except for the little Chef Louis and the little maid, head of the maids or whatnot, because they're not that important. They're side characters here, which are introduced to the main antagonist, Ursula, the main protagonist, Ariel, all the side characters, and their personalities within the first 15 minutes of the movie. And if you've been watching the commercials at the time, back when this came out, you know that right before the 15-minute mark is that huge song that was everywhere at the time that you couldn't really avoid. And you're wondering, like, where is that? If you watch the commercials, you're wondering, where's that song? Right when it hits the 15, you're given almost everything you need to know about all the characters right before the 15-minute mark. It's even before the inciting incident where Ariel rescues Eric, or sees Eric, and falls in love with him. That's all given to you within the first 15 minutes. And then, if you're going to watch 1 minute more, you've got the entirety of that song. The movie has you at that moment. Within the first 15 minutes, they've introduced almost every concept of it. The concept of magic, the concept of Atlantica, of Ariel's personality, of Triton's personality, even a little bit of Eric's personality. He's shown as kind of like an adventuresome, but if not a little naive at times. He's introduced as being kind of young. They're both kind of young. Ariel and Eric are young. And all this is set up way ahead of time. We already have some danger, some action, and we already have some humor. We already have 2 songs out of the way, by the way. And that's kind of really fast-paced. And the movie continues like this. I do want to mention, even though it's past the 15 mark, I love the fact that the entire thesis, the part where we're really introduced to the character motivations of Ariel through that song, through Part of Your World, isn't even until the 15-minute mark of the film. All of it's been building up to that, teasing it and getting up to that point. And right when it hits that 15-minute mark where you are deciding whether or not you are going to continue watching that film, the first couple notes of that song that was in all the commercials, that was there to promote the movie, the one big showstopper right there, just starts up right there. And it's perfect. It sets up that Ariel's idealistic, although we have set up that she's interested in this stuff. We haven't set up her real motivation for it. You're given all this little information about it to lead up to that, and then given that in that particular song, which perfectly illustrates what I mean by the 15-minute mark, by the 15-minute principle. If you are serious about putting together a movie, any movie, animated, live action, whatever, you need to understand the importance of your 15 minutes, because most audiences don't even have a 15-minute attention span. We need stuff in minutes of 5, 10, etc. That's why things like Snapchat and Vine were popular. That's why YouTube stuff, I mean, if you're over 10 minutes, you're still getting monetized, but most people tend to lose interest within a certain amount of time. That's why you need to have almost all the information about your film out within the first 15 minutes. And you can judge a film by that. By this one here, you get to these 15 minutes and you're like, yeah, I want to know what happens because, one, there's this song that's been in everything, and here's the first couple notes of it. it just brings you into that. And by the time that you realize the 15-minute mark has passed, you're in there. You're already given this you're right there at this one particular song, which sets up everything about it. It sets up the idealism and worldview of Ariel, who, by the way, is a fantastic character. The only character I would say that's really kind of Ursula's interesting in that she's kind of the voice of privilege in this film. Ursula would be your third wave feminist in this film. She's, as put out in her later songs, she's kind of she's anti patriarchy. She's horrible scum, and she cheats. She sets up things. She sets up games that only she can win, and does her best to make that happen. She's the prototype for the social justice warrior of our era, which is kind of amusing when you think about it. Yeah, because she looks at people from a surface level, even though she's underwater. But Ariel is interesting in her song that she has, part of your world. She wants to know more about this. Her entire life, her entire personality, her entire life motivation at this point, her entire worldview is encapsulated in a real quick conversation between her and Flounder. Flounder asks her if she's okay. It's kind of interesting that Flounder would say that, and the line delivery is perfect in there, but the reason she would do that is because this movie here, a lot of these characters, King Triton, Sebastian, Flounder, etc., many of these characters have her well-being in mind. They want to know that she's okay. They want to know that she's provided for, taken care of. They want to make sure that what they do is for her. And what she wants to do is she doesn't want people to do these things for her. She wants to know about things and to do things for herself. Ariel is an interesting character in that her next line after Flounder asks her if she's okay, she's like, Flounder goes, "Ariel, are you okay?" And her response is, "I just don't see why a world that makes such beautiful things could be all bad." That's her entire motivation for the film, and why she falls in love with Eric, why she's enamored with the stuff here. She looks at it and studies it, and it's kind of like, I guess you could say, Central Park Media had this wonderful slogan called that was world peace through shared popular culture, and Ariel encapsulates that in there, that if we can find some common ground, a look at the beauty of something, what people create and what they do speaks more than their origins. It speaks about who they are and who they are as a person. When you understand a culture and can appreciate the beauty in that culture. Now, many cultures do have barbarism in it, and you can focus on the barbarism, and you can, like, for example, which is what King Triton does, what Ursula does. You can focus on that barbarism, the things that aren't beautiful about something, and you can completely misinterpret it. In fact, like the whole Under the Sea sequence where Sebastian's trying to tell her about, maybe it's better to stay down here, It's not a stay in your lane song. It's like, hey, you're looking at this and saying, all this is beautiful, but here's this stuff here. This is beautiful too. You can appreciate the things that you have. And that's kind of what he's trying to say. He's trying to say that not stay in your lane, Ariel, which is kind of the one way to interpret it. The other thing he's saying is like, hey, there is so much here that you don't know about or haven't appreciated. It's kind of like, it's important for us to look at other cultures and to examine stuff, but we also need to examine that stuff around us as well. Kind of like a can't see the ocean because of the waves type thing, or forest because through the trees, etc. But yeah, I find this to be a pretty good example. Disney's The Little Mermaid. Oh, sorry, Glenn Keane. Did I say? I think I said Campbell earlier on. No, it's Glenn Keane. I knew that was something I was missing. Anyways, it's just a fantastic example of what I mean by the first 15 minutes of your movie demonstrating your movie. So let me know in the comments below what you think of The Little Mermaid. Or are you going to look at movies a little bit differently? Do you think I'm wrong with my concept that the first 15 minutes of your movie should encapsulate your movie? And what other movies would you like me to examine critically the first 15 minutes of? I would say the first 15 minutes of The Little Mermaid are successful in making you want to watch the rest of the film. So make sure you hit that like button, hit that share button, hit that subscribe button, ring that little bell so you're notified whenever we have a brand new video. And until the next video comes out, you are now caught up.